senior, attending Penn State, double majoring in public relations and sociology. This semester, fall 2016, I was fortunate enough to take a class with Mr. Tanner Cook. It was Comp 410, and it was International Mass Communication. Throughout the semester, we learned various topics, including media and cultural imperialism, hegemony, cultural proximity, different ideologies and communications theories, along with the overall media economy and media censorship. These topics have given me the opportunity to understand a more in-depth meaning about the communication systems in the world and how they impact and influence different nations and different countries. Three of the topics that I enjoyed the most out of all the topics and concepts we learned in class were globalization, cultural hybridity, and glocalization, which is a mix of globalization and localization. Okay, so let's get started with some definitions and examples. So to start off, I want to start with globalization, which is the lifelong process of interaction and integration among people and companies across the globe. The process is due to international trade and investments, of course, and it has expanded due to the advancement in technology. This phenomenon can be analyzed politically, economically, and socially. It is seen as spreading different cultures, ideas, and products to different parts of the world. So let's put it this way. Have you ever noticed if you walk into a supermarket or if you walk into a clothing store that most of the products aren't made in the US? If you look at the mangoes, they are produced in Mexico or Ecuador. If you look at the clothing, it's mostly made in China or different parts of the world. These different clothing stores and grocery stores get these products from another country, which is essentially globalization. Now, one of the effects of globalization is cultural hybridity, which is the blending of different cultures. Now, cultural hybridity can be observed in many different ways. It could be analyzed through music, through television shows, through food, and through languages. Now, an example that I really want to focus on throughout this video, throughout this section of the video, is cultural hybridity through languages, specifically through Spanish and Quichua, which is the indigenous language of the Incas. So, indigenous people from Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. So, when the Spaniard conquistadors conquered the Incan Empire, they gained control over the whole empire, and there was a blending of language because the Spaniard came in speaking Spanish, and the indigenous people spoke Quichua, so they had to kind of understand each other's language, and eventually ended up blending it. So a modern example of this would be, for example, there's a lot of Spanish workers that come from different countries and they don't know much English. So these American workers try to understand the Spanish workers and they kind of speak Spanglish together. So that's the way I see how back then the Spaniards communicated with the indigenous people who spoke Quichua. Because of cultural hybridity back then, a lot of these words are still used by Spanish speakers today, including myself. So I am a native Spanish speaker. I was born in Ecuador and moved to Jersey when I was 7 years old. So growing up, my parents spoke Spanish to me, and up until recently, I didn't know that some of the words I was using were actually Quechua. Of a Spanish word that originated from a Quechua word is cura, which means priest. And in Quechua, the word cura used to refer to the head of the community in the Incan Empire. So it's spelled a little differently, but essentially it means priest. And also another word that we use in English as well as Spanish that originated from Quechua is puma, which, is the animal. So in Spanish, puma, in English, puma, but it's still came from the roots of Quechua. Another word is ñaña, which means sister in Spanish. And for me, it is really interesting to see that these words were from so long ago from indigenous communities and are still used today due to the blending of different cultures from such a long time ago. So lastly, I will talk about globalization, which is globalization and localization. And this is think global but act local. And it is basically a product that is customized so it could attract the local audience, but it's a global product. So a lot of people give the example of McDonald's, but I will give a different example. So I will give the example of Lay's chips is owned by Pepsi Company and produced in the USA, and they are a prime example of being a global company because they're sold in Indonesia, China, Mexico, different parts of the world. Lay's chips, I found out that there are Lay's sold in Mexico with hot sauce, and there's also Lay's Tapatio, which is a hot sauce brand, so they're extra spicy. There is Lay's Magic Masala sold in India, which is an Indian cuisine flavor. And there's Hamon flavored chips in Spain and Portugal, and even Brazil Pihana sold in Brazil. And some of these chips, lastly, there's also Lay's seaweed sold in Indonesia. So some of these chips are also sold in the US, and I believe that they're sold here too because there's a lot of international population who would love to try these flavors. I know that I wanted to try the chimichurri flavor from Brazil. Anyways, so this is a prime example showing that Lay's chips wants to reach their local community in different countries, and they change their flavor to reach that audience and to have more. What's the ultimate goal of everything? More revenue. So they are listening to this rule, which is think global and act local. In conclusion, learning about globalization, cultural hybridity, and glocalization have really taught me to view the world in a global perspective. All three of these topics are connecting the world together, even if it's through products sold in the market, through globalization, or if it's cultural hybridity with languages. It's all very interesting to see that these have always existed. Centuries back, they have existed and they will continue to exist. Now, it's also interesting to see globalization and how companies strive to reach those audiences by customizing their products to the according culture. So yeah, these topics have taught me a lot, and I am really happy that I took this class. Now, with that being said, I would like to thank Mr. Tanner Cook for teaching us the whole semester. Thank you. Bye.